our guide, who was from Hebron, who was showing us around the city, they have these, what they call flying checkpoints, where you have soldiers just come and create a checkpoint.
As you can see, I'm locked into a couple of heavy birthday cakes, and I am celebrating my proverbial 75 years of life.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Vermont to New York City, on the internet at thestruggle.org. Our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. Let's start off with some good news. In a first, a U.S. National Labor Union has joined the BDS movement. It came about in a vote at the United Electrical Workers August Convention in Baltimore. The union calls on Congress and the administration to end all U.S. military aid to Israel and to pressure Israel to end the occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the siege of Gaza, and negotiate a peace agreement on the basis of equality, democracy, and human rights for the Palestinian and Israeli people, including Palestinian self-determination and the right of return for refugees. Endorses the BDS movement and urges the union at all levels to become engaged in BDS and the movement for peace, justice, and equality between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Excellent. I'll be speaking to Nina Stein of Waterbury, Connecticut, who's right back from a trip to Palestine, Israel. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Let's start with Silwan. Where is that? What did you see there?
Okay, Silwan is a village. It's in East Jerusalem, and it borders the south side of the old city. We were at a youth center there, and actually on our trip we visited several youth centers. The Palestinian youth are quite traumatized. Many of them have been arrested and have spent time in Israeli jails. Those who haven't have seen siblings and fathers arrested. So many of the towns have youth centers where they create programs for these kids. This one had a soccer program, a summer camp. Some of them teach Arabic. They teach them arts, and they teach dancing, various things like that. The village of Silwan actually is in an area that the Israelis have decided to situate biblical gardens of King David. And so they've marked 88 houses for demolition. And some of the demolition has already started. One of the interviews we had, one of the presentations we had, was by a young boy whose name was Muslim. He was 15 years old, and he was describing his arrest. Israeli soldiers came to his house. They actually asked the father for the names of all of the children, and we were told afterwards they do that so that they can get names so that they can do further arrests.
What time of day did they come?
This, I think, was in the afternoon, but frequently they come in the evening. In fact, we were told that the night before we were there, they had come at 3 o'clock in the morning and arrested several children. So Muslim was arrested. They claimed they had pictures showing that he was throwing stones, which isn't surprising because a lot of the youths there do. That's one way they have of showing their resistance. He was held for 8 hours without having his father present. And according to Israeli law, children under the age, he was 15, children under the age of 16 can have an adult present, and usually it's the father when they're interrogated. So he was held for 8 hours.
But they're not under Israeli law. They're under military administration.
They're under military. Yeah, I don't know if that applies.
Yeah, I mean, it means they don't have the rights that the Israeli youth have.
Okay, so yeah, but it was presented as.
I'm not saying it's just. I'm just saying that's the way it is.
So that's the way they can do things like that. He was imprisoned for 2 weeks, and then when he was released, he was put under house arrest in another village. He wasn't allowed to come back to his village for a certain period of time. So the least of this is, here's this 15-year-old, he can't go to school, he's missing school, and this is typical. We were told that there was one young man in the village who had been arrested 9 times between the age of 9 and 15. So arresting children, and they tried to intimidate the kids. They tried to get them to collaborate, to talk about activities of adults. Yeah.
We should have asked this before. When did you go down, and who did you go with?
Okay, I went with an organization called Interfaith Peace Builders. We traveled from July 28th, I think, to August 7th. There were 20 of us in the group. Ages ranged from late 20s to early 70s. People from all over the country. And among us, there were, out of the 20, 6 of us were Jewish. We had one Muslim woman, a biology teacher actually from New York who teaches in Harlem. And also among the group, there were 6 lawyers, which was kind of unusual. Yeah.
Did the Muslim woman have any special treatment coming in on the plane? Or?
Yes. You have to go through security. She was pulled aside. She was taken to a special room for questioning. She was detained for an hour. They kept asking her the same questions over and over, she said. We were told that she might even be detained longer than that, but they did let her go after an hour. And she also got detained on the way back as well. Yeah.
Now, you were there, I believe, during the period when that horrible attack, the burning of a family, 2 people were killed, a little baby, and then the father. What happened? I mean, you heard about it while you were there?
Yeah, we heard about it while we were there. The next day, we went to a part of East Jerusalem where our guide was trying to point out, actually, when we first came, he described that land as a land of walls. And the way he described it, there were walls to separate one group of people from another, people from each other, people from their land. So we were taken to this wall that was blocked off a road. This was actually an ancient trade route from Jerusalem to the east. And while we were there, the side that we were on, there were 2 Israeli guards. Kids from the other side were throwing stones, and we saw a jeep. This Israeli jeep raced ahead. There was a lot of action going on there. We were told to get back into our bus. After we got into our bus, one of the people in the group noticed from the window that some of the stones were falling right actually where we had stood. So we were told that this was not the area where the family was burned, but we were told this was probably in response to the burning. Yeah.
Now, some of the other places that you went, we talked earlier, you were in Hebron and Jenin, and what should we talk next?
Okay, so maybe about refugee camps. We were at 2 refugee camps. We visited one refugee camp in Jenin, and another one, the new Askar refugee camp in Nablus. And we actually spent an evening there and stayed the night. We divided up and we stayed with different families, and then the next day we had a tour of the old city.
What's a refugee camp like now? I mean, these things have been around for years. We're not talking about tents anymore.
Exactly. They're like just little villages. They're very, very crowded because they can't expand out. We were told that historically Arab villages expanded out, but these people can't expand out. They sometimes try to expand up, but when they do that, lots of times the houses are destroyed because they need permits. It's very difficult. They hardly any permits are issued.
Destroyed by
the Israeli army. And so they live, it's very crowded. They live, a lot of people in a few rooms, and the streets are very narrow and buildings right up against each other. But just one comment to say in general about, and not only in the refugee camps, but all the Palestinians we spoke to, I was really impressed. They're all very dignified, they're very articulate, very determined, and when we asked them what they wanted, they want their rights to be recognized. You know, even before you talk about states or anything, it's their lives are very constrained, and human rights their human rights are being denied. That's what they want. Yeah.
Now,
But I could say also, yeah. So because you have pictures, we visited a youth center called the Kafia Youth Center in the new Askar refugee camp. There were some young men that they have a dance troupe there, and some young men were doing a dapka, which is the national Palestinian dance. They treated us to a magnificent performance. And actually, another thing is, a lot of these young people and people in this group has traveled to other countries. And one of the young men who I had talked to afterwards had been to France and had been to Italy. And it's very interesting, they can travel to other countries, but they can't travel to certain parts of their own country. But we had that evening very amazing dance performance by these older boys, and then the next day we were again treated to another dance performance by a group of younger people, and also a very good meal. Yeah.
And Jenin, you went to the Freedom Theater?
Yeah, Jenin, we went to the Freedom Theater, and this was established now, let's see, the woman's name was...
Mayor Khamis, forgetting her first name. Giuliano was her son, Arna Mayor Khamis.
Yeah, and she's actually Israeli. Her father was actually a physician who helped cure malaria, or helped treat malaria in some of the areas in the early days. But she helped develop this theater, and this is for these traumatized kids whose homes have been destroyed in Jenin more than once, to give them a way of expressing themselves. And the theater now actually travels around and goes to other Palestinian villages, and there's a term they use which I can't remember, but they try to get the people there to participate and express themselves and what they've experienced.
Yeah, there's a special term for the kind of theater that makes it more interactive. Yeah. And they're actually coming to the U.S. They're going to be in the spring in New York. And you also went to Hebron.
Yes, so we went to Hebron. It's very interesting. So Hebron has two sections. It has H1, which is the lower area, which is Palestinian, and it's administered by the Palestinians. H2 is the upper area, and this is Israeli and Palestinians. Originally it was all Palestinian, but now Israeli settlers are moving in. The mosque in this area, of which I have a picture, was where this American settler did a massacre, came in and killed a lot of Muslims who were praying. And so after that, instead of inhibiting the settlers, they decided that they had to protect the Arabs, Palestinians, by closing down their shops. So there's a whole section of the area that was once a very busy commercial area is all closed down, pretty much deserted.
One thing, though, you say protect the Arabs, but it's protecting the settlers from the Arabs, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what, yeah. But their term was...
punishing the victims.
Yeah, that's essentially what they were doing. Mm-hmm. But they were nominally, protecting the Arabs is what they said.
So you were allowed to walk on streets and some natives weren't, is that right?
So our guide, who was from Hebron, who was showing us around the city, they have these what they call flying checkpoints, where you have soldiers just come and create a checkpoint. We were on a deserted street, and there were two soldiers there, and they came up to us and stopped us, and those of us in the group had our American passports. We showed them our passports. That's fine, you could go through. But our guide, who was from Hebron, and he had his identity card, he couldn't go through. So we didn't go with him. We didn't go through. We went with him on the street that he could travel. And this occurred also in another part of the area too, where we were going to go up to the top of the hill where we were going to eat. So there was a road that went directly up. He couldn't go up on that road. He had to go the long way around. So we went the long way around. And there were other, also another checkpoint we traveled right in the middle of this city. You know, there's this checkpoint we had to go through. There was a young Palestinian man who was being detained there. We went over and we talked to him for a few minutes. On our way back, he wasn't there, so I don't know how long he was detained, but they did let him go.
Maybe we could end up by talking about Bil'in and Sderot. So Bil'in is a Palestinian town. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so this is a Palestinian town. It's kind of well known. I knew about it before I went, for their demonstrations. They have a wall that actually cuts through what was once the whole town. They now have half of it is blocked off. On the other side of the wall is an Israeli settlement that's going up. It's huge. To me, it looked like a little city. But this village is famous for their nonviolent protests. Every Friday afternoon, they come and they protest nonviolently, but they get violent responses from the Israeli soldiers. They throw tear gas. People have been injured by tear gas canisters. One man was killed he got hit in the chest by a tear gas canister. Live bullets. Our guide's older son got shot in the leg. He had a nerve was severed, and
we mentioned on a recent show that the bad news is that they now expect he won't be able to have any feeling in that leg.
Yeah. So this is a young fellow. Also, a couple from a neighboring village came and spoke to us, and the wife was on crutches, and she had been shot in the leg. She fortunately is going to be recovering, but it's taking many months for her. So we took a road that went up to the wall, and on the road there was evidence of loads and loads of tear gas canisters. So I have some pictures of those. Mm-hmm. When the Israelis came, actually the protests, they did win a little bit of a victory. Originally they had a gate there, and they were able to get them to move it 500 meters farther away when they constructed the wall. But Iyad Bernat, who's our guide, his father's farmland was on the other side of the wall. He lost his farmland. When the Israelis came to build the wall, they pulled up olive trees, and apparently olive trees live very long. Some of these were really long-lived, like in the order of 1,000 years old. They had to replant others.
And what's on the other side of the wall now?
So the other side is an Israeli settlement, and I don't remember the name. You knew the name of that one.
In English, it's Upper Modi'in.
Modi'in Elite, you said, yeah. And they're still building. We saw the land being dug up. We saw the big machines and buildings not yet inhabited.
All right, so let's maybe close with Sderot. Now, this is right next to Gaza.
Yeah, Sderot borders on Gaza, and this is the place whenever there's violence in that area. These are the villages. These are the people who get the rockets that come in from Gaza. And it was really interesting. We spoke to two women from two different kibbutzim. Both of them were quite liberal in saying that we really need to respect the Palestinians, their rights. They're not being given their rights. We want to have them as neighbors. We want to have them as friends. But what I thought was very interesting was their reaction to the Holocaust. The first woman who we spoke to, and she was from, Kfar Aza, and you could tell there's this fear. I mean, a lot of what's underlying the Israelis' policies is some deep down fear. And as much as she wanted to respect the Palestinians and wanted to have them as neighbors, you could tell that there was this fear in her, and felt that there should be a state for the Jews. And And this was sort of the legacy of the Holocaust in her mind, is this lingering fear that we need a state. But interestingly, the second woman who we spoke to, her name is Namika Zion. I was extremely impressed by her presentation, very moving, and she's from a group called Other Voice. And her response was that the lesson from the Holocaust: never again, never victimize others.
Let me go back a bit. The war, the last, what they call a war sometimes, was just a year ago. We know Gaza is still totally devastated. Do you see devastation in Sderot?
No. So whatever the bombs were, there's no evidence of any devastation. I should mention that in that first kibbutz, they do have bomb shelters all over, which we were able to look at and go into. And I think in each room now, when they build, each house has to have one room with reinforced concrete that will serve as a shelter. But no, they didn't see any destruction.
Were there any missiles shot while you were there?
No, nothing while we were there. And you could actually see from the first kibbutz, their fields just went right up to the border with Gaza. You could see Gaza City from there. But no.
So I'm sure the people you met with were probably not the typical people. I mean, I was just, in reviewing for this, I was looking at an article from last year, people sitting on a hillside watching the bombs fall on Gaza, and one guy said, well, we're here for a lot of reasons. We want this to stop, and because it's fun. So.
Yes, and this is what actually Namika told us. It was in Sderot where that happened, and she told us about that. They were sitting and they were cheering. Yeah.
So all in all, would you recommend this trip for others?
Yes, definitely. It's interesting because I had done a lot of reading beforehand, so I knew a lot about what they told us. But just being there on the ground, meeting the people and experiencing their resilience and their determination, and life is still going on. The kids are dancing, they have families, they eat delicious food. So
you're talking about the Palestinians.
I'm talking about the Palestinians, yeah. So meeting these people, and also I have to admit that on the other side, I thought it was very encouraging that we met quite a few Israelis to see that there are Israelis who are able to see the situation differently from how it's presented by their government and are willing to advocate for the Palestinian people. So this particular organization has a reputation of all the groups that go there, dividing their time most evenly between the Palestinians and Israelis. So yes, I would, just meeting the people there, I think
And the name of the organization?
Is Interfaith Peace Builders.
Well, thank you very much. Okay. I've been speaking to Nina Stein about her very recent trip to Palestine, Israel. Nina wanted me to make sure that I quoted some of the statements made by that Israeli woman who lived near the Gaza border. Here are some of the things she said. 50 years of occupation left a profound mark on Israeli society. Because of years of this, they have lost their ability to see Palestinians as human beings. They are invisible. You only hear about them when there's violence. They have one collective identity, which is terrorist. We lost our ability to feel empathy for others. We became not only blind, but numb. Finally, we don't care anymore that this is something I can't live with. And she quoted Shalom Ash. When you stop seeing others as human beings, you stop being human yourself. Capitalism versus the Climate member Vic Lancia celebrated his 75th birthday by locking down to 2 concrete birthday cakes. He was blocking the entrance to SPECTRA Energy's largest pipeline staging area in Connecticut. SPECTRA is using the staging area to store equipment for the construction of a $1 billion fracked gas expansion project. After blocking the access for 2 hours, Vic negotiated with the police and unlocked. Vic wasn't arrested, and he got to keep the concrete birthday cakes. Here is a picture of the event, along with an audio statement by Vic Lancia.
As you can see, I'm locked into a couple of heavy birthday cakes, and I am celebrating my proverbial 75 years of life, which I've been privileged to have, courtesy of Mother Earth. And so this is my humble gift back to her for giving me a long and in situations like this, a fulfilling life. I want to do this because I have a reverence for life, and I would like to see the young people at least live as long as I do, and to see many more generations be the beneficiaries of the work of Mother Nature.
We have to stop projects that increase the use of fossil fuel, because we're living in a time when we must reduce that use. As I should perhaps say in every program, climate scientists are telling us that if we don't leave most of the oil and gas in the ground, when babies today are old men and women, they will face a climate hell. Check our website for an amazing climate event taking place in Brooklyn on September 12th. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller, and this is The Struggle.